So, who says economists don't know how to have fun? For those who watched the last clip, we were at the home of Nouriel Roubini on Saturday evening. Now we are in the Lion's Den at Roubini Global Economics, sitting down with the man himself. Nouriel, you are a perennial member, actually, of the Foreign Policy Top 100 for the right reasons, because you've gotten the big things right, but you continue to issue sage warnings about the health and fragility of the global economy. So what are the biggest warning signs today of another crisis?
Well, one of the most serious ones is this very sharp rise in food commodity and now oil and energy prices. The causes of the Middle East turmoil are complex, but certainly the rise of food prices triggered these food riots that were the tipping points for the beginning of some of these uprisings. It's not just in the Middle East, but also in India, in Pakistan, and other parts of the world, that this rise in commodity prices is leading to social, political instability because it's significantly increasing inflation and reducing the income of many poor people.
So there's a subprime crisis in food stocks, and that's going to topple governments. Which ones do you think are next?
Well, in the Middle East, I'm certainly worried after Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya about a failed state like Yemen, who could break up, go into civil war. I think that there may be a real regime change in Bahrain, a country with 70% of Shiites, and now eastern province of Saudi Arabia, where all the oil is about mostly populated by Shiites, so turmoil could spread there. Jordan could be another candidate, eventually even a country like Syria, and certainly Iran is a country where the population wants to get rid of an oppressive regime that is brutally repressing itself. So you could have regime changes in most of the Middle East in the next few months, if not years.
Let's shift over and take a step back and talk about Europe. Do you think that maybe you were a bit too pessimistic about Europe? Given the political character of the Union, they did come to the salvation of the euro and with bailouts for Greece and Ireland and so forth. So do you feel that, in fact, the eurozone is on track and will not fall apart?
I don't expect a collapse of the monetary union, but the fundamental problems of the periphery of the eurozone have not been resolved with more official money and bailouts. Large budget deficits, large foreign liabilities of the private sector in countries like Spain and Ireland, where you have the housing boom and bust. You have structural reforms that have not occurred, low economic growth, if you're not contracting output in places like Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, Ireland, and you have this loss of competitiveness after a decade of wages growing more than productivity. So how are you going to restore growth, restore competitiveness, reduce private and public debts, and restore economic performance? I think it's going to be extremely challenging, regardless of the commitment of the Eurozone members to maintain the euro and have more official resources to help those in trouble.
So the pigs are still in trouble, but then there's another category of countries, and there's a real status competition going on of acronyms. BRICS, CIVITS, VISTA, everyone wants to include their favorite country in their list of emerging markets. But tell us, which emerging markets do you think are underrated, and which ones do you think are really never actually going to emerge?
Well, I do agree that acronyms simplify things. You have to look at a long list of economic, long-term, demographic, and social and political factors as well. We've seen recently in the Middle East, the IMF came by saying that most of these countries were sound, and in a matter of weeks they collapsed. And like the IMF, Wall Street, policymakers, risk managers totally blew it. So we have to be aware of what are those social and political cleavage that can lead to political instability. I would say that actually among the emerging markets, China is a little bit overrated, and I think that the future could be stronger for countries like India, like Turkey, like Indonesia, like Brazil, that are growing populations, the large domestic market, consumption being 2/3 of GDP as opposed to 1/3, less leveraged and relying more on domestic demand. So I think that in the next decade, maybe India could have a higher growth rate than China, for example. There are also smaller emerging market economies that with appropriate reforms could actually succeed. The countries like Mongolia, like Vietnam, like Bangladesh, like Kazakhstan, for example.
Now, the other night you looked in this camera and you said, we are nerds, dweebs, and geeks, but obviously very policy-relevant ones, such as yourself. So tell us, what are the most important lessons that policymakers should take from academic economics?
Well, as I pointed out in my recent book, Crisis Economics, financial crises that are considered as black swan events, to use the terminology of my good friend Nassim Taleb, are not really black swan events. They are white swan events because they are predictable, and they are the result of the build-up of macro financial and policy vulnerabilities eventually reach a tipping point. So they're not a 20 standard deviation event, they're not really events that occur once every 100 years, they occur with increasing frequency and virulence, and academic research and other research can suggest what are the factors that lead to vulnerabilities and to build up a boom and bubbles and eventually go into a bust and a crash. That's one of the important lessons.
So I don't think they should call you Dr. Doom. They should call you Dr. Boom and Bust or Dr. Turbulence. How about that?
Or Dr. Realist. It's not a question of being optimist or pessimist, but having a realistic and sensible and objective view of what's happening out there. And I would say in addition to traditional macroeconomic, fiscal, and financial risk, the emphasis should be today on geopolitical and social and other types of risks that are relevant and interconnect with those economic and financial ones.
Dr. Realist Nouriel Roubini, thank you so much for joining us on the Foreign Policy video blog.
Great being with you.